Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Aalborg University, Faculty of Engineering and Science, I'd like to welcome you to the PhD defense by Carrie, Beth, Peterson. My name is Børge Lindberg. I'm head of the Department of Electronic Systems here at Aalborg University, and my role is to be moderator of this defense, which primarily means that I shall make sure that things will go smoothly. And secondly, it's also my formal duty to make sure that things will take place in accordance with the regulations for PhD defenses at Aalborg University. Before giving the word to Carrie, I would like to introduce to you the assessment committee. And we have two external members of the committee and one internal. One of the two external members is Professor Dr. Andrew Sixsmith. Please raise so we can see. Hi. Professor Sixsmith was appointed professor and director of the Gerontechnology Research Center at Simon Fraser University in Canada in September 2007. Dr. Sixsmith has been a member of the British Society of Gerontechnology Executive Committee and has been UK representative on the EU COST A5 Committee on Aging and Technology. Since 2000, he has developed research and teaching links with 26 universities worldwide and has actively collaborated with over 30 major commercial and government organizations. Dr. Sixsmith received his doctorate from the University of London in 1989, and from 86 to 89 he worked as a research associate in the Department of Psychiatry of the University of Liverpool, evaluating new initiatives in the care of people with dementia. He was appointed lecturer in gerontology in the Institute of Human Aging at the University of Liverpool, where he was responsible for teaching on the Master of Science in Gerontology and carrying out evaluations of community care for older people. Dr. Sixsmith's research has two main themes. Firstly, he has extensive research experience within the area of health and quality of life of older people and the role of health and social care services. Secondly, he has been particularly involved in the strategic development of research in the area of technology for independent living. The second external member of the committee is Associate Professor Anders Kottorp from Karolinska Institutet in Sweden. Anders Kottorp is Associate Professor and Deputy Head of Department, being main responsible for division and faculty activities within education, both Bachelor and Masters, research, education and research. He is a Clinical Associate Professor at the Karolinska University Hospital, Clinic of Occupational Therapy, and Adjunct Associate Professor at Zürcher Hochschule für angewandte Wissenschaften, Department Gesundheit, Winterthur in Switzerland. His main research interest has always been how we, as healthcare professionals, can provide best practice in relation to evaluation and intervention in everyday life situations to maximize the opportunities for people with a variety of disorders and disabilities to participate and perform the tasks that are of importance for them. He has been principal investigator for development of assessment of awareness of ability, A3, and in collaboration with Professor Louise Nygaard, sounds Danish, but I'm not sure she is, responsible for development of everyday technology use questionnaire and management of everyday technology assessment. Welcome to both of our external opponents. The second member of the committee is the chairman of the committee, Associate Professor Stig Kjær Andersen from Department of Health Science and Technology. I should also mention that the two supervisors have been main supervisor, Associate Professor Lars Bo Larsen from the Department of Electronic Systems and Professor Ole Heilesen up there from the Department of Health Science and Technology. The program for today is that Carrie will give a presentation of no more than 1 hour, after which we will of course have a break, and then there will be about a 2 hours questioning session, including questions from the audience. That means that if you in the break already know that you are going to ask a question, please notify me so that I can make the best planning possible. I think that's about what I have to say. Welcome, and I'd like to give the word to Carrie.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. First I'd like to start by thanking the Department of Electronic Systems for allowing me to study something that I'm really excited about. And I would like to thank my colleagues and my friends and my family for their support and encouragement over the years. And also to my supervisors for their guidance and feedback, and also to the committee for reviewing and improving my work and for being here today. So, as many of you know, much more goes into a PhD than can be described in under an hour. So today I will focus on the main issues and outcomes. I'll first give a short introduction and background to the topic area, and then I will discuss the description of the research that I've been doing over the past couple years. Following this, I will present my results and discuss their implications before my concluding remarks. So first, I'll give a short introduction what it is that I do. So I'm a gerontologist, so I've studied the sociological, biological, and psychological study of aging. And I tend to focus on people with dementia. So here in electronic systems, what I did was work on technologies for aging adults, particularly in dementia care. So this would include things like electronic calendars to remind them to take medications, or GPS locating if they wander away from the home, automatic lighting, things like this. So now you have a short introduction on me. Let's move into the background on the research area. We're experiencing a global phenomenon in aging, and two factors are coming into play. They are decreasing fertility rates and increasing life expectancies. Globally, birth rates have declined by about 50% since the 1950s. And in the 60 years between 1950 and 2010, life expectancy has increased by over 40%, from 48 years to 68 years. Currently, more than 60 countries have a life expectancy of 75 years or more, and it's believed the life expectancy of 100 years is right around the corner. Presently, the total fertility rate is below the replacement level in most industrialized countries today. The fastest aging societies are those with the greatest declines in fertility rates, and Europe and Japan face the most immediate impact of aging. Europe's changing population structure is shown here. Population pyramids are starting to look more like population kites, as there's a shift from more younger people at the bottom of the pyramid to more older adults at the top of the pyramid. Currently, the ratio of tax-paying citizens to non-working pensioners is about 4-to-1 in most industrialized countries. But by 2050, this is expected to drop to 2-to-1 or lower in some countries in Europe and Japan. I believe presently it's 1-to-1 in Italy. Europe became the first major world region where those over the age of 65 outnumbered those under the age of 15, and this was back in 2005. In just a few years, before 2020, those over the age of 65 will outnumber children under the age of 5 in the entire world. In fact, one of the fastest growing populations is those over the age of 80, called the oldest old, and they're projected to increase by over 240% by the year 2040. So with longer lifespans, we also see an increased risk for developing dementia. Dementia is most commonly associated with aging, but actually can occur at any age. And the youngest reported incidence of dementia I have found was a 6-year-old who had a rare genetic disease that caused dementia. Those over the age of 85 in the oldest old group have a 50% risk of developing dementia based on age alone. During this presentation, there will be roughly 675 new diagnoses of dementia. As the bar graph shows, there will be a 225% increase in people living with dementia before the year 2050. Dementia is not a normal part of aging, but it is one of the most feared aspects of aging, and it's one of the leading causes of institutionalization of older adults. Now, dementia refers to a combination of symptoms, so it's called a syndrome. There's over 100 different types of dementia, and their causes range from dietary deficiencies to genetics to brain injury. In dementia, there's a characteristic progressive decline in cognitive impairments, and these lead to an inability to perform complex tasks and an eventual inability to perform most basic activities such as dressing and eating. The three primary symptoms are cognitive and functional decline and mood changes. There's currently no drug, therapy, or treatment that can stop, reverse, or prevent dementia. And until there's a validated promise in one of these areas, the main focus of dementia care is on quality of life. The majority of dementia caregiving is carried out by volunteers. These are usually family, friends, or neighbors. Statistically, they are female relatives of the person with dementia, most typically a wife or a daughter, and on average, they provide care for 40 hours a week or 20 hours a week for 4 years. And this places quite a burden on the caregivers. Due to the nature of the syndrome, they're known to have different experiences and feel greater burdens than caregivers for other diseases or conditions. Now, aside from out-of-pocket expenses, caregivers are known to adjust or quit their employment, experience social isolation, have slower wound healing, poor sleep hygiene, and greater cardiac reactivity. Up to 85% of informal caregivers for someone with dementia have symptoms of clinical depression, and up to 50% of that group has major depression. Now, this last statistic becomes important as mental health science is finding a strong link between depression and the development of dementia later in life. So since we know that there will be an increase in the number of people with dementia and a decrease in available caregivers, it would be great to find additional methods of care to accommodate. Technology is ever pervasive and can provide a wide range of solutions to accommodate dementia care. Some of the reported benefits of early monitoring and warning systems are reported here. Previous research shows that caregivers are most interested in technology interventions that will help them deliver, monitor, and track and coordinate their care. When reviewing the state of the art on gerontechnologies for dementia care, the majority of reviews state that they are skewed by the diversity of the population. The age, education level, personality, these will all differ from person to person. Furthermore, different methodologies will have different research aims, study designs, outcome measurements, and this makes it hard to decide what the common goals are and the common results are from gerontechnology interventions. The majority of studies have small sample populations, methodology problems, and insufficient evidence on the effects of health outcomes from using technology. So now that you heard a little bit on the background on the area, let's move into the research that I've been doing. So my hypothesis was that using technology in dementia care would have a positive effect on the quality of life of people with dementia and their caregivers. The null hypothesis is that there would be no effect on quality of life and no difference between using care as usual and technologies in dementia care. The rationale for the thesis is grounded in the need to promote an understanding of the use of health technologies. My PhD has been funded by the Department of Electronic Systems and the European Commission FP7 project ISASEMD. ISASEMD delivered and tested a set of scalable, reliable, supportive services for people with dementia and their caregivers. These were tested in real-life conditions in the 4 European countries of Denmark, Finland, Greece, and North Ireland. Some of the main activities that I was involved in the ISASEM project were supporting the development of the services, and this meant liaising between what social and healthcare services determined were their patients' requirements and between the technical partners of what the system was capable of delivering. I also helped to gather the user requirements and set the inclusion and exclusion criteria. I worked on the trial protocol and the ethical application. I helped with the different adaptations of the graphical user interface, especially for the person with dementia. I also assisted in determining the evaluation tools that we would use in the project, and I helped administer some of the evaluations in the region of Denmark. I assisted with the interpretation of the outcomes by cleaning the data, meaning making sure that all the stated scores were within their defined ranges. And I was a key member in the dissemination of the project through conference presentations, public speaking, and peer-reviewed publications. Now, after the ISSM project concluded, I cleaned and treated the data again and conducted my own independent analysis, and the results of that is what I'm presenting today. So among the participants, there will be different beliefs on dementia, different coping strategies, different personality traits, and all of these will affect how the person views their caregiving situation. So since research on dementia interventions are multifaceted, it's helpful to collect the information from various angles. In ISSM, we use a triangulation of methods that consisted of standardized questionnaires, professional observations, and semi-structured interviews. We found that the interviews were a fast and efficient way to elicit the information we wanted, but it was easy for the participants, especially the person with dementia, to conceal difficulties that they didn't want to talk about. The observations made it easy to distinguish between the functional and environmental problems within the home, but they were time-consuming and subject to weaknesses if the dyad is performing for the observer. So due to the individual care requirements and to the progressive nature of dementia, we grouped our services into 3 bundles of increasing care. The participants were free to choose which services would best match their care situation. The basic services included things like monitoring cooking and flood and fire detectors, and the more advanced services consisted of localization for the person when they're outside of the home or medication management. And we also tailored the services to the users whenever possible. So for example, one caregiver requested that they would have a confirmation button after a medication reminder, so the person with dementia could press this and they could better keep track of the medication management. Working with the person with dementia and their caregivers is important, as previous research shows that the most successful dementia care interventions are those that are multi-component, so they use multiple methods and elements in the intervention. They're multi-targeted, so they address the caregivers and their families, including the person with dementia. And by allowing the participants to co-create the intervention, meaning that they can identify the problems to be addressed, the methods to address them, and the timing and the frequency of the interventions. Through the telecare system, the caregivers could log in to see the status of the home, recent activities, and adjust parameters. Notifications would be generated if there's an activity or lack of activity that's outside predefined parameters. So say, for example, one person with dementia would typically get out of bed 3 to 5 times during the night. A notification would be generated if they go outside those parameters, meaning gets out of bed more than 5 times in one night or doesn't leave the bed at all in one night. Personalizing the services required training to make sure that the caregivers understand how the system works, and also so that they can accurately interpret the information and make adjustments that work best for them. The installation and trainings took an average of a few hours per home, and there were variations in the regions due to the different numbers of sensors, wires, and technical issues. We found that it was most effective to first explain and demonstrate the service, and then ask the participants to try it out themselves. All users received manuals with picture guides and instructions that were tailored to their user level, their technical level, and translated into their local language. And they also had access to additional ad hoc training if desired. So this device was used for localization and communication. When the person with dementia is outdoors, for example, in Denmark, it's quite common for older adults to take walks. So some of the formal caregiver staff, they would first check the status of their patient to make sure they were home before driving out for a home visit. For the person with dementia, this gives them a sense of independence, knowing that they can leave the house and either contact someone or be found if they should become disoriented. The device provides localization through GPS and functions as a mobile communication device. It has one distinct red button that serves as two-way voice communication, so it initiates a call to caregivers and can receive a call from the caregivers. It also has an accelerometer to detect movements and falls. Now in dementia, there's a characteristic difficulty in creating and keeping the structure of the day, and this is often one of the first symptoms noticed in early dementia. The electronic calendar provided orientation and structure through the date and time, and also through reminders such as to eat a meal, take a medication, or of scheduled visitors to the home. Aside from the communication button with the GPS device, the person with dementia could also contact their caregivers through a button on the touchscreen interface. Now, we had originally designed this service to be used for emergency contact, but at least one participant had lost their ability to use the regular home telephone and would now use the contact button on the touchscreen to make regular phone calls to their caregivers. But in this case, it was noted as a normal parameter of use and no longer raised alarms for the caregivers. This is one example of how people with dementia use innovation to adapt to their environment, and they really are great innovators. In addition to the reminders and prompts, the electronic calendar can also display alerts. So for example, we had one participant who wished to be told themselves if they had left the stove on for too long. They wanted their independence in resolving any home safety issues themselves before their caregivers were notified. This service controls cooking through time-based parameters, and actuators will disconnect the electricity to the stove when the cooking time has been exceeded. Each person with dementia will have their own predefined time for cooking, so the person who boils water for coffee or tea will have a shorter amount of time than the person who prepares full meals. Many older adults enjoy the independence of being able to go out and shop, or take walks, or attend local activities. So with the door monitoring service, if the person with dementia has not returned home after a predefined time, a notification is raised to the caregivers. And this service is also adjustable so that in the case that the person with dementia is no longer safe to leave the house alone, an alarm is generated as soon as the door is open. This device works through electromagnetic switching to register door opening and closing, and can also be outfitted for windows or the refrigerator. For many caregivers, losing a loved one outdoors is a fear that causes worry and stress, and this is one of the things that causes them to have poor sleep hygiene. We also use smoke, fire, and flood sensors, and motion sensing through passive infrared. The bed occupancy sensor is about 1/2 inch thick stainless steel, matte or a strip, and it detects the presence of more than 2.5 kilograms. So sleep-wake times are registered based on presence in the bed or not. As a quote from this caregiver in Finland says, she had received the message that her mother had been out of bed for too long, so she drove over and found indeed her mother had fallen and was on the floor and needed her help. And this actually happened more than once for this dyad, so this caregiver was particularly happy to receive these alarm messages even if it was the middle of the night. So to test if our services achieved our ambitious goal of increased independence and quality of life, we used assessments that are known of and used in the field of gerontology research and dementia care. To assess the cognitive functioning of the person with dementia, we used the Folstein Mini Mental Status Examination. This is one of the most widely used cognitive assessments. It's best suited for determining global cognitive functioning, but has a lower sensitivity to Alzheimer's disease, mild cognitive impairment, and other dementias. So we also used the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or MoCA, which is more sensitive to milder changes and is highly sensitive to Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment. The CATS Activities of Daily Living, or ADL, and the Lawton-Brody Instrumental Activities of Daily Living, or IADL, are two widely used assessments to assess the physical functioning of older adults. Both consist of items that are rated as dependent or independent, and both have been correlated to the need for long-term care and to quality of life. And it's also been shown that functional declines is one of the most significant indicators of caregiver burden. So quality of life, as I mentioned, is one of the most important indicators in assessing the intervention outcomes of dementia care. Quality of life can be measured from a number of different angles, and ISSM used a questionnaire that closely matched what people with dementia self-report as quality of life domains important to them. I don't have time here to discuss all the different ways to measure quality of life, but perhaps we could take this up after the presentation. So the quality of life of the person with dementia was measured through the Quality of Life Alzheimer's Disease Scale. The QOL-AD is administered to both the person with dementia and their caregiver, and this is done in attempts to gain a more accurate portrayal of quality of life. If we use the person with dementia's assessment alone, they may not have full awareness of their situation, and if we use the proxy or caregiver report alone, proxies tend to rate quality of life lower than the person with dementia themselves would. So since this is an assessment of the quality of life of the person with dementia, their score is doubled before being averaged with the caregiver's score. And the caregiver's quality of life was measured through the Scale of Quality of Life of Caregivers, the SQLC. Since we know that caregivers of people with dementia experience greater burdens than other caregivers, this is due to the responsibilities of their care, such as lack of time for themselves, and also due to the natural involvement of the relationship, such as feelings of guilt. So we use the 12-item Zaret Burden interview to assess both role-related and personal strain. Along with the standardized questions, the intervention group answered additional questions on global outcomes. These were considered secondary outcomes specific to the technology use on their acceptance and satisfaction with the telecare. Now, these exact questions aren't standardized or validated, so they're not recommended for direct use in other studies, but they do serve as a guideline to develop additional outcome indicators in dementia care. So now for the main course. What did my results show? In ISSM, we recruited 71 pairs of people with dementia and their caregivers, and these pairs are called dyads. We found it was difficult to recruit participants in the right stage of mild to moderate dementia, and we found that people in the early stages often don't seek out formal help until their symptoms cause enough problems in their daily life. So the health and social care systems didn't have access to people in the earliest stages of dementia, and unfortunately many of the referrals were in the moderate to severe stages and therefore not appropriate for our study. We also found that doctors didn't fully understand the implications of how the technology could help their patients, which indicates that further education would be needed for clinical professionals to know the options and expected benefits of their patients using telecare. Of the 71 participants, 63 were appropriate to include in the study and were allocated to the intervention and control groups. The intervention group would get the technology, and the control group would carry out care as usual. 8 of our participants withdrew, and the reasons for withdrawing were due to an overall deterioration in health or family life. So this would include stroke, moving to a nursing home, or death. And we had one dyad that withdrew in Denmark region due to an inconvenient number of technical issues and to the belief that the person with dementia could carry on well enough themselves without additional support. Missing data was considered missing at random, meaning their file didn't have the full set of baseline and final evaluations. And so a further 2 dyads in the control group were removed in a list-wise deletion. Of these 63 appropriate participants, 53 had complete data sets for analysis, 31 in the intervention group and 22 in the control group. Now, due to the difficulties recruiting participants in Denmark, it was decided that all participants in this region would be in the intervention group and there would be no control group to compare. So the following slides will note whether the 6 dyads from Denmark are included in the analysis or not. This analysis is pre-test and post-test and comparative at the 95% confidence level. Our participants were statistically similar at baseline, aside from caregiver age, where they are an average of 8.97 years different. However, this difference was considered representative of that which would occur in the general population, so therefore still appropriate for our study. So over the next 412 days, these were the technologies that were used. For example, one caregiver found that his mother wasn't eating as much or as regularly as she said she was, so they were able to arrange for a hot meal service through the community. Multiple caregivers reported that the largest impact they noticed was in reassurance for the safety of the person with dementia through the activities monitoring and the easy contact systems. The touchscreen contact button, reminders, electronic calendar, and GPS were viewed most positively in the ISSM project. But we also had our fair share of issues. For example, in the summer, tiny insects would crawl in between the touchscreen computer and make emergency calls to the caregivers in the middle of the night. And this was quite distressing, especially in the beginning of the project when we didn't know if it was a technical issue or what. And this was actually part of the inconvenient number of technical issues that caused the one dyad in Denmark to withdraw. We also had some connectivity problems, especially in the mountainous areas, and some participants in Greece and Finland had to be reallocated to the control group as it was no longer feasible to offer them the technical services. But take, for example, one participant. He had gotten lost once before, and he had been afraid to leave his house alone. And this had been over a year he had been afraid to leave his house alone. With the GPS service, he gains independence by being able to go outside of his house. He takes walks in nature, which many would say is a contributor to one's quality of life. He walks dogs, so he is in touch with animals and has an outlet to socialize. And I had studied animal-assisted therapy both in my undergraduate and graduate degrees, so I am a firm believer that contact with animals is beneficial to people with dementia. Furthermore, he walks the dogs for his neighbors, so he's contributing back to his community. They don't have to drive home from their lunch break anymore when he can do this for them. He also gets the exercise, which helps to control his diabetes. And this same gentleman actually had several incidents where he had fallen asleep during cooking, and so we adjusted his service that he would get an audio prompt from his touchscreen computer, reminding him to wake up and turn off the stove. So we see that these technologies seem to have made real differences in people's lives. But what does the analysis show? Well, paired t-tests looked for significant changes within each of the groups from baseline to final evaluation. I see that both of the groups exhibited significant decline in their instrumental activities of daily living, the higher physical functioning. I also saw that the control group had a highly significant increase in their caregiver burden. Previous research suggests that these two are correlated, so I tested for this through a Pearson's correlation, but I found that that these two were not correlated for the control group. I also saw in the intervention group that the people with dementia had a decline in their quality of life, and this was opposite of what we had hypothesized. Again, previous research has suggested that there's a strong correlation between independent functioning and quality of life for people with dementia. So I looked for a correlation through a Pearson's test, and I found that only the self-reported score by the person with dementia was correlated with their declines in instrumental activities of daily living. Overall, the effect was not significantly different using telecare from using dementia care as usual. But we see this one result on the end, the ZBI, does look a little different than the other results. So the independent t-tests showed that there was a significant difference in indicators of quality of life. And the Zera Burden interview outcome, this was significant both with and without Denmark's participation. Those who used the technology had a 4.3% improvement in their caregiver burden, and those who didn't use the technology had a 19.7% decrease in their caregiver burden. Well, an increase in their burden, a decline in it. So the data shows that technology use was associated with delaying or deferring an otherwise expected increase in caregiver burden. Now, since I know that there is a significant decline in the quality of life of the person with dementia in the intervention group, when we asked our participants the global question on if the quality of life changed with the use of technology care, all of the participants responded positively. So I conclude that there's not a strong agreement between the standardized and non-standardized assessments. And furthermore, since the control group's quality of life outcomes showed similar decline, I conclude that these are not significantly different and the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. Both of the physical functioning assessments show decline in the intervention group, but when we asked if technology supported independent living, again, none of the participants reported a decline. So although the majority do show actual improvements in their functioning, those who do show negative results show significant enough negative results to outweigh the majority's positive effects. But there's not necessarily disagreement between these two. Furthermore, the two types of care didn't produce significantly different outcomes between control and intervention groups, so we can't reject the null hypothesis. the standardized results on caregiver quality of life showed that there was non-significant improvement. And again, as with rating the quality of life of the person with dementia, all participants responded positively. But here we say there's some agreement between the standardized and non-standardized results. However, the control group showed similar improvements in their caregiver quality of life, so the null hypothesis is not rejected. The intervention group showed improvement in their standardized caregiver burden interview, and none of the caregivers reported an increase in care responsibilities with the use of the technology. So there's some agreement between the standardized and non-standardized outcomes. Nearly the same percentage who report positive effects on their Zaret burden interview also report decreased care responsibilities. And also, since the control and intervention groups had significantly different Zaret burden interview outcomes, we can conclude that the null hypothesis is rejected. The small majority of our participants were willing to continue paying for these services, and 100% of the participants felt that the system had positive effects on safety, with over 80% reporting increased safety with the use of the telecare system. The majority report that they were satisfied and wished to continue using the services. But this wasn't altogether unexpected, since we heard reports from the caregivers not noticing how stressed they had been until they started using the telecare system. Formal caregivers reported that they also saw benefits for the dyad and especially for the caregivers. So in summary, I used 7 standardized evaluation tools to test between the control and intervention groups. And additionally, the intervention group answered 8 global questions on their use of the technology. The majority had high user acceptance and satisfaction. And the evidence between the telecare use and the Zaret burden interview outcomes suggests that this is a promising area for further exploration. However, as I mentioned, we had unanticipated difficulties in recruiting our participants. And having 53 dyads to compare only gives me 35% power to tell if the 2 types of dementia care are significantly different. Since the 2 groups didn't have significantly different overall outcomes, the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. So now let's discuss what could these results mean. Well, first, our global outcomes didn't appear to reflect the statistical analysis, and these inconsistencies provide initiation for new research questions, such as what criteria did the people think of when they were answering the global questions? Using the defined constructs in the standardized assessments also requires the person being interviewed to comprehend what those constructs mean. So asking a person with dementia to rank their social life might be much more difficult than asking them a global question on their quality of life. Furthermore, there's still no consensus on what significant levels of meaningful change are for the results to be considered clinically significant. The administration and scoring for the assessments is largely pen and paper methods to evaluate high-tech technologies, and these are both time-consuming and subject to human error. Lengthy administration sessions can cause fatigue and stress among the participants, and in-person interview sessions are subject to weaknesses based on human error and interviewer bias. I also noticed that there were some important differences in several of the standardized assessments that hadn't been reported in the literature before. In the instrumental activities of daily living, in the Greek version, there was an extra option to answer that wasn't available in the other versions. And in the Greek version of the Zaret burden interview, one of the questions referred to dementia as synonymous with death, and this was not the same in the other versions. Furthermore, in the Finnish version of the 12-item Zaret burden interview, there were only 11 questions. And we also found in the scale of quality of life of caregivers that different points were awarded for the same questions in the different languages. And we found this test was best suited for a snapshot view of quality of life rather than for measuring longitudinal change in caregiver quality of life. So this thesis, overall, it doesn't strive for or advocate that technology replace the human aspects of caregiving, but simply to look into and add to the evidence base on how technology can accommodate population changes and the increased need for care. If caregivers can use a passive monitoring system, they'll have more peace of mind knowing that the person at home is safe and they'll be notified if there's an emergency. As this graph shows, caregivers for people with dementia experience high levels of emotional stress and physical stress related to their role. If we can protect the caregiver's physical, mental, and social health in midlife and as they continue to age, this will have vast implications for public health. Also by reducing the high rates of caregiver burden-related depression and the need for costly institutionalization of people with dementia. The combined cost of formal and informal dementia care was valued around 2% of the global GDP. So that's just under 1 trillion euros in 1 year. If formal dementia care were a country, it would have the world's 21st largest economy, ranking between Poland and Saudi Arabia. And if informal dementia care costs were seen as company sales, it would boast more than the world's largest company sales, which was Walmart in 2009 at 300 billion euros. So, benefits for the economy as well. So, to compare my research with similar research in the field, previous research has reported that MMSE is predicted to decline by 2 to 4 points per year. This is the global cognitive functioning of someone with dementia. And we found that both our intervention and control groups showed less decline than research suggests. And the physical functioning has previously been correlated with predicting caregiver burden, but neither of our control or intervention groups has strong correlations with their caregiver burden and physical functioning. There we go. Also, the physical functioning has been correlated with the quality of life of the person with dementia. But we found that only the intervention group's self-rated quality of life was correlated with their declines in physical functioning. Furthermore, the quality of life of the person with dementia, taking the proxy and the person score, has been reported to have a very high inter-rater agreement. And we found quite the opposite in our study, where there was suggestion for low inter-rater agreement. These are some of the previously reported benefits in telecare systems, such as monitoring for the person with dementia, saving on time and finances for the caregivers, reducing stress and burden in the caregivers, increased independence and social activities for the person with dementia, so on and so on. And I would say that quite a few of our results support or are synonymous with these results as well. So this indicates that there is a growing evidence base on the use of gerontechnology outcomes. So now for my concluding remarks. So this study successfully implemented and tested a telecare system in 4 European countries for over a year. They were tested in real-life conditions and tailored to accommodate the different organizational structures of care, as well as the individuals who were using the services. Evaluating multiple indicators of quality of life provides multiple angles to evaluate the outcomes. And these services were rated high in user acceptance and satisfaction and found to be effective at supporting best practices in dementia care. A significant association was found between positive effects in caregiver burden through the use of a telecare system, and this further suggests a promising area of further research. Population aging is unprecedented, without parallel in human history. Population aging has profound implications for all facets of human life, intersecting with virtually every area of public and private life. How can aging societies care for the old without imposing a burden on the young? How will economic performance be affected as workforces gray and rates of savings and investment decline? And how is the impact of global aging by region and by nation likely to transform the geopolitical landscape and the balance of power? I think that this is a really exciting time for gerontologists because we are in increasing demand in nearly all areas of public and private life. And this is also an exciting time in gerontechnology, where technology provides a multitude of options to care for older adults. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your attention. Hopefully I've answered most of your questions on what it is that I do, but I really hope that I have made more questions and encouraged you to find out more about aging societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So we'll now have 15 minutes break and resume at 2 o'clock with the questioning session.